Welcome to Football Geeks. My guest is a man of many talents: producer, writer, scriptwriter for the radio and TV, and established author. Today, we'll be talking about the second book in his wonderful football trilogy. It's called 1954, and it recounts the football and social history of 70 years ago. With more feathers in his cap than Hiawatha, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Marvin Close. Hello, Marvin.
How you doing, Phil?
I'm very well, mate. I'm very excited to be speaking to you this evening because, like we've spoken outside of the podcast, the books are terrific. They really are. Thoroughly enjoyed reading them, and there's some fabulous stories to be mined. I'm going to come back and interview you in future at 1923 because I know we're talking about 1953, but I started reading 1923 first, as I told you in the email I sent you. Mm-hmm. Thoroughly enjoyed it, mate. It's fantastic, and it deserves. I'm sure it's had pre-coverage when it first came out, but I just want to revisit it anyway because it's fabulous. It's fabulous. So, Marvin, you've been involved in writing for a good deal of years, haven't you? Would you like to give me a resume of the works that you've done in your time as a writer?
Oh, blimey. Okay, well, I started off really as a theatre writer, and I was writer in residence at the Library Theatre in Manchester, and I wrote, 7 or 8 plays at the start of my sort of writing career, and one of them, which was about the Goons, it was a comedy about the early days of the Goons, got seen by the then producer of Coronation Street, Mervyn Watson, and he'd really enjoyed it. And so he asked me to come in to talk about becoming part of the writing and script editing team at Coronation Street. And I was blown away by this, went to what I didn't realise was an interview with him. I thought I was just going in for a chat or something. And we talked for about 20 minutes and he said, "So do you want to come and join the team?" And I thought, oh my God, this is the show that my mum watched when I was a kid, And I said, yeah, great, So we sort of shook hands. And then, well, the funny story is I then left the room, opened the door and walked out, and everything was dark, and I'd walked into his wall cupboard and I'm stood there in the dark, and I can hear him laughing on the other side of the door, and I think, what the hell do I do? And I think, well, all I can do is come out and say hi again and then walk out the other door. And I then worked with Mervyn when I then moved from Coronation Street to Emmerdale, and he then was producer there, and he never let me forget that story. He would always say, "Do you remember when you walked in my wall cupboard?" So yeah. So anyway, so I worked on Emmerdale. I wrote, I think, I don't know, 60 or 70 episodes for them. I then worked on Tracy Beaker, which was a blast. That was a wonderful show to work on. Then some other children's series around that time, 24/7 and House of Anubis. And then I was working for Doctors, set in Birmingham, as you well know.
Indeed.
And I think you've got some family connections there, haven't you, with Doctors?
Yeah, my brother Rob, he's been in several episodes of Doctor, as we've discussed before. He's kind of cross-charactered in it, so he's been in a number of roles. Some minor, but some fairly meaty as well. He's done a lot of acting, not just in Doctors, but he's enjoyed his time with the show. Anyway.
Yeah. And then I've also done quite a bit of radio. I've done written and produced some radio documentaries. I did a fantastic, well, I'm not saying it was fantastic, it was fantastic to do a documentary about Monty Python doing a special in Germany, in German.
I remember
Monty Python's Fliegender Circus, it was called. And it was fantastic because and this is absolutely. I spoke to Michael Palin and to Terry Jones, bless him, before he died, to make this, and they both said that when they arrived in Germany, they were told, "Or here are your scripts," and they said, "Oh, we've got our scripts," and they said, "No, these are in German," and they said, "But none of us speak German." And he said, "Well, yeah, but you got to do it in German." And so they literally had to have like huge banners in front of the camera with the phonetic German that they all spoke. And it was a disaster as far as the producers were concerned. And they said, "We can't put this out." I said, "But we've got to. It's all it's all there to transmit and everything." And they put it out, and the German audience loved it because they thought that the overall joke was that Monty Python's people were pretending that they couldn't speak German well. So it went down brilliantly. So that was a documentary that I did about that, and some other ones that I did. And then as a consequence of that, my agent was doing some work with an American professor, Professor Chuck Core, who remains a great friend of mine to this day. And he had been doing some guest lecturing in, sorry, this is about my first football book. He'd been doing some guest lecturing at Cape Town University, and he'd been given an office. And in the corner of this office was, I don't know, these walking cupboards seemed to be a fixture of my writing lives. He opened this cupboard, and it was full of old cardboard boxes. And on the edge of every of these boxes was written the Robben Island Football League. And he thought, what the hell is this? So he pulled all this stuff out, and it was old bits of toilet paper, bits of writing paper, and they were the committee minutes for the football clubs that had been formed in apartheid South Africa with Nelson Mandela on Robben Island prison. And the prisoners had created a football league, and the football league, they spent 5 years trying to get the prison authorities to agree to them playing football. And then once they'd done that, this football league went on for nearly 20 years inside Robben Island prison. And Chuck had found all the detail about all the teams and things like that. So he managed to get in contact with some of the ex-prisoners, talked to them, interviewed them. And he was very much an academic historian. And my agent had approached HarperCollins at the time, and they'd sort of said, well, we need it writing in a more, not commercial style, but sort of more of a sort of general interest book rather than an academic book. And so I was sort of brought on board, and so I did some interviews. We talked to ex-players on the island, all this kind of thing, and then we kind of wrote it together. And so that was my first football book, more than just the game Football v Apartheid, that came out. And I just thought to myself, I've got to be doing more of this. I've got to write more football, because that's what I've always loved football. It's in my family, it's in my blood. Lifelong Bradford City fan, and you've got to be a fan to be a Bradford City fan.
Indeed.
And I'm sure we can talk more about that later. But so yeah, that really got me into writing more football books. A very good friend of mine, Shelley Alexander, who used to be like the lead editor at the BBC for women's sport. She and I were talking one day after More Than Just a Game had come out, and she said, you should write Hope Powell's life story, the former England women's football manager and football player. And it took me nearly 2 years to get her to agree to do it. I'd keep going back to Hope Powell and saying, come on, Hope, your story's really important. First woman manager of the England women's football team, first black manager, first gay manager. It's really important to tell this story. And eventually she agreed to meet me, and we met at King's Cross Station down in London. And I spent an hour in a Starbucks convincing her that we should do this. And so that was my second football book, the Hope Powell's life story. And then I just got this 4 book deal with Pitch, which started off with a book about non-league football called I Hope You Die of Cancer, which was something that was shouted at this non-league player whose life I follow through the book by his own fans. Would you believe? You know?
Yeah.
So anyway, then we came on the 1923 book and 1953, and then there'll be the follow-up, the 1974 book, which will be 50 years ago when that comes out next year.
Fantastic, which we'll talk about a little later. So we'll stay at the point of 1953, which is the second installment. And I've just finished it. It is, honestly, listeners, it's fantastic. You need to purchase this book because it's a fun read. It's not just football; it's social history.
Thank you.
It's got something for everyone, really, but especially obviously if you're a football fan. But prior to us coming on air, I asked you to detail 3 of the stories contained within the pages of 1953. So with no attention to chronology of that year, I'm going to do them in sort of the opposite order.
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to use the first one as the opener, because it's quite a big opener, isn't it? It's a game that kind of redefined football in England. It was such an important game. But the realization of where our national game was going on. I'm talking, of course, about England versus Hungary in November 1953. Would you like to talk us through the kind of preamble to that game and the game itself, Marvin?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's interesting that, you know, people look at it in hindsight from a general point of view and kind of think, oh, you know, it was just a friendly game between England and Hungary. Not a bit of it. Not a bit of it. Certainly not from the Hungarian side, because there were so many other narratives at play for this game. England at the time had already got some red lights earlier in the year about how staid and unchanging the way the England side particularly played against international sides. They'd gone on in May earlier in that year. They'd gone on a tour of South America, and they'd been beaten by an Argentine President's 11 3-1. They then got beaten by Uruguay 2-1, who were the reigning world champions at the time. But they were kind of embarrassed in these games because it was shown that the very rigid way that they played was being outthought by foreign sides who were starting to play with totally different tactics. Players were more interchangeable. You know, for England, you know, you man-marked that person. You played that way in midfield. You waited, if you were centre forward, for the wingers to come down, and then you do your stuff. It was all predictable. They got beat badly, although 3-1 and 2-1 doesn't sound bad. They were kind of toyed with in South America. Then, following that, they played to mark I think it was the 90th anniversary of the FA or something. They played a game in the summer close season against the rest of Europe, rest of Europe 11. And very interestingly, the Hungarian coach at the time, Gustav Sebes, wouldn't allow any of his Hungarian players to play in that rest of Europe side, although I think 4 of them had been asked to play. And he said, no, we're playing England in November. And basically, I don't want him to see any of my players. This is how serious this was getting for the Hungarians, okay? So England drew 2-2, very luckily, with a last-minute penalty against the rest of Europe. The rest of Europe were playing a different style to England and a much more versatile style. So England had lots of red lights and warnings coming up this Hungary game. Meanwhile, in Hungary, months before this game actually happened, Gustav Sebes, the Hungarian coach, got the Hungarian FA to create a pitch that was exactly the same size and dimension as Wembley. Okay. He then went around the top Hungarian sides and found players who played similarly to the regular England players like Mortensen and Matthews and Billy Wright and Tom Finney and people like that. And he played practice match after practice match with his top 11 against this pretend England 11 on this Wembley pitch over in Hungary. They used the same size and weight of ball that they used in England, which was different in mainland Europe, and tried to replicate all the conditions that they could do that they would play against at Wembley in November, because they saw it literally. You know, the Iron Curtain had fallen, and they literally saw it's East versus West, capitalism versus communism. So there was a huge amount riding on this game. And the other thing was, their coach Gustav Sebes was also the Hungarian deputy sports minister at the time, and deeply ingrained within the Communist Party in Hungary. So there's so much riding on this for Hungary, you know. So fast forward to November, I think it was the 25th of November, and Wembley's packed. No floodlights yet, so it was in the afternoon. Pretty grey, drizzly day. As the Hungarians are running out, the England captain Billy Wright prods his striker Stan Mortensen on the shoulder, and he says to him, "Look at him, look at him." And there's Billy Wright and Stan Morton stood there in baggy shirts, baggy shorts, boots that are still a bit like hobnail boots, basically. And he's pointing to the Hungarian side coming out, who are wearing V-neck, tight-fitting shorts, shirts and shorts, lightweight football boots that are like slippers, you know. and Billy Wright taps Stan Mortensen on the shoulder and says, "Look at them, they're not even wearing the right kit." And it's like, oh my God, it's the beginning of the end. I mean, like within minutes, Hungary are 1-up, you know, and the way they're playing, they're interchanging between position. Their centre forward, and I'll try and get the pronunciation of this right, it's Nandor Hedekuti, who was a fantastic player at the time. He played in what was called a hidden position. He played centre forward, but unlike English centre forwards, he wasn't the guy up front as the battering ram. He played behind his two other forwards, Puskás and Sebes, and he would just weave in and out, find space, and then attack through that. And he scored after a few minutes, and the poor English centre backs didn't know what to do with him. They didn't know whether to man mark him or follow him, or so basically the Hungarians were showing England a completely different way of playing football, and they played them off the park.
Yeah, it was a different kind of training and tactics. Their game was just based on speed and ball control, wasn't it? And sort of, like you say, the interchangeability. It's funny you should say Gustav Sebes. He called it socialist football.
That's right.
Football based on the collective rather than the individual. So it was a nice kind of communist metaphor that he even squeezed into that, mate. And an incredible game of football, wasn't it?
Yeah, and the interesting thing was from it was that, you know, we talk about the seismic effect it had upon English football. It didn't immediately have that effect on the FA or people within the establishment, because as we know, England went to Hungary the following year and got beat 7-1 out in Hungary, But however, there were players at the match on the afternoon. One of being Bobby Robson, who was a young player at Fulham at the time, and he'd already started to have thoughts about coaching and management. When he finished playing, and he went to the game expecting England to just walk through it, cruise through it as everybody else did, because hey, we're the best team in the world. We invented football. And he was just blown away. And he in interviews many times after that sort of said that changed his entire perspective on football. In a more direct sense, Don Revie, who was Man City's centre forward at the time, was there at the game and was just blown away by Nandor Hidekuti's, what he did on the pitch, to the extent that he went back to Man City and convinced them to start playing him as this hidden centre forward and playing behind another two strikers so he could find more space. The following season, he did that and became Player of the Year. So it did have massive effects.
Seismic effect on the world game, not just the and it all harks back to those incredible kind of coaches. Jimmy Hogan, he was the he was the coach. He was actually at the game, but on the invitation of the Hungarian FA, I think, rather than the English, who had forsaken him because he after World War One, he went and managed in Austria and Hungary, and he was considered a traitor by the FA. But the Hungarians stuck with him and invited him to that game to watch.
Well, Hogan was an absolute pioneer tactically. He a lot of that, particularly sort of Central European style, like you say, the Austrians and the Hungarians, a lot of that came from Hogan. He came with such fresh ideas, and once again, it's one of those stories about how the FA, particularly, just threw away our best talent, and allowed them to go abroad. And
that's
then,
right.
I think he was, he did have a spell at Villa for a while,
he did,
but fell out with the players because they couldn't work out what he was trying to show them, atypical Villa.
he got them promoted to the first division, but he didn't. I think after that they couldn't apply what he was trying to to put out onto the field. They couldn't apply it. So we'll move on to the second story now, Marvin. That's fantastic, that one. I absolutely love the kind of everything about that game and the legacy that it left behind. But we're going to move back 6 months to another iconic game of 1953, which was the FA Cup final, which has this mystique and it's given this incredible reverence. But in your book, you explain it wasn't quite the final that everyone anticipates it to be. It has got this kind of golden hue that surrounds it, but it wasn't exactly that game, was it, Marvin?
No, I suppose. Statistically looking at it, the high scoring ever FA Cup final, 4-3, hat trick for Mortensen, and we'll get onto that in a moment. Matthews, at last getting the FA Cup medal that he so yearned for so long. But again, there's other narratives at play. Everybody was saying at the time, oh my goodness, Stan Matthews, 38 years of age, this is his last chance to win an FA Cup medal. And yes, he won his FA Cup medal, and it became known obviously as the Matthews final. But Stan Matthews went on to play into the 1960s, and actually I think he was 51 when he played his last professional game at Stoke. After that 1953 FA Cup winning final, he was Player of the Year. He continued to play for England. So it wasn't the last chance saloon for Stan Matthews by by any means. And it's interesting that he always, when people said it was the Matthews final, he'd get very angry, and he'd say, no, Stan Mortensen's final. You know, for goodness sake, this guy scored a hat trick. You know, that also is debatable, though. Again, the Mortensen hat trick, golden hues, and all this kind of thing. If you look at any film footage of the actual final, it's a defender who deflects it into the goal, so it's actually an own goal.
Yeah, by VAR standards of the modern game. I watched it this afternoon, Marvin. It wasn't going on target until it took that rather hefty deflection.
Yeah. And you're right. If it was VAR today, he wouldn't have got the hat trick. But you know, still the Mortensen hat trick. Everybody remembers that sort of thing. The other thing is that, you know, they talk about it being Matthews' final. It was only the last 25 minutes or so where he really turned it on. For the rest of the game, the early part of the game, Bolton had really done their homework, and what they did was they just starved him of any possession, because, you know, it was well known that there was no mystery to Stan Matthews' game. He was always out on the wing, feed me the ball, I'll cross it. Usually Stan Mortensen will get his head on it or his foot on it or something like that. It was only because of his trickery and his speed of movement, things like that, that he got away with the obvious all the time. So Bolton decided for that final they were just going to starve him of possession. And for most of the game, he did it was very rare for him. He started to come inside and float around, and he became less and less effective as the final went on. And it was only in the last 25 minutes when he kind of thought, oh, got to get back out on the wing. And then it all happened. He had 25 minutes of fantastic football, you know, made all of those goals basically, you know. But for the other 65 minutes, it'd been really ordinary, you know. So it was not the Matthews final, except for the last third, really.
That's it. I mean, I think also 1953, as you say in your book, it was the advent of the TV, wasn't it? So 1953 was the first final that was televised, because the Queen's coronation was around a similar kind of time area. Wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And there was also there's another chapter in the book which is about a really unusual tournament that was launched because of the Queen's coronation, called the Coronation Cup. And it included 4 Scottish teams and 4 English teams, clubs, not countries, you know. And it was so rare in those days for English or Scottish clubs to play anybody outside of their own leagues, you know. And it created massive interest, you know. All of the games were played at Hampden and Ibrox, because it was felt that, again, with the Queen's coronation, you know, we must honour Scotland as part of the Union and all this kind of thing. So all the games were up there, and it was Celtic who won it. But the irony is, it was a period of time where Celtic were a really poor side. The season before, I think they'd finished 10th, and the real 2 sides in Scotland at the time were Rangers and Hibernian, you know. So yeah, nice sidelight to that whole kind of coronation year was that Coronation Cup tournament.
Yeah, fantastic, mate. Yeah, great story. As I say, there's lots of little golden nuggets in the book that you pick up about the year and the incredible changes that have taken place since. But we'll move on to your third story, arguably my favourite chapter of the book. About a character that I hadn't heard of before.
Oh, right.
Before I read about this book, but the people of Sheffield will probably want to string me up for me, making that kind of statement, because he's absolutely huge, and especially so in the city of Sheffield, wasn't he, Marvin?
Yeah. This is Derek Dooley, who after 1953, became both manager and chair of both. Of Sheffield United. In 1953, he was playing for Sheffield Wednesday. He was 23 years of age. The season before, he'd got Sheffield Wednesday promoted with his 40 goals in Division 2, and had come into Division 1 a very raw player. You know, he wasn't massively skilled. He was a battering ram. He was about 6'3", heavy build, massive barrel chest, like legs like tree trunks, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
A really hard player to play against. It took him a while to find his feet in the first division amongst more skillful players, but by Christmas and the New Year, he'd started firing again. He was scoring goals. Sheffield Wednesday had been around the bottom. He was pulling them further up the table. They had a game at Preston North End, which he was really looking forward to because it was where he'd made his debut as a player a few years before. They played against Preston, fairly ordinary first half. Beginning the second half, ball went up in the air. He was one of those players who would fight any cause, you know, any lost cause. Ball up in the air, went towards the area to try and head it. Preston goalie came out and they collided very, very badly. Dooley falls on the ground, and usually it was like, you know, like a boxer who's like pride wise, it's like, oh, I'm getting up. And that was Dooley. Usually he'd be straight back on his feet if someone had knocked him down. This time he stayed on the deck, and all his teammates immediately realized, whoa, there's something wrong here. And they were, you know, calling the St John's ambulance people on with a stretcher and everything. And he got carried off. And famously, he waved to the Sheffield Wednesday crowd. Someone shouted to him, you know, get better soon, Derek. And he'd said, don't worry, lad, I'll be back soon. Went off to hospital in Preston. It was diagnosed as a really bad double leg break, and that was going to put him out of football for months. So they did what they could, put him under operating things, put a plaster cast on him, put him in bed. He had to stay in hospital for a few days. He was a very likeable, very witty Yorkshireman, and he got on really well with all the staff in the hospital at the Preston Hospital. And there was one night, one of the nurses, he asked her to sign his cast, and she jokingly tickled his toes as she was doing the cast, and he obviously didn't feel it. So she this was a bit of a problem. She tickled his toes again, and he didn't feel that, and alarm bells were ringing. So she got a doctor to come and look at it, and he like manipulated his foot, and he couldn't feel anything. And so they thought, oh, there's something really wrong here. So they cut the cast off, and as they cut the cast off, this unbelievable stench came out, and it was gangrene. And the guy's leg had gone gangrenous, and they think it was to do with some chemical that had been in the pitch, the lines on the pitch at Deepdale in Preston. But anyway, whatever it was, it infected this break, and they had to make the decision literally that night whether or not to take his leg off, because they were concerned that the gangrene was spreading so quickly, you know, it was going to kill him. They were also aware of the fact that this 23-year-old professional footballer, first division side, who was being tipped to become a full England player that season, you know, if not at the top of his career, coming towards it and everything. And they had to make that decision. You know, he's if we don't take his leg off, he's going to die, you know. And it's a desperately sad story, you know, a guy who, and he just got married as well, you know, everything was going for him. He'd just signed a new contract with Sheffield Wednesday. He was on what was then the maximum wage and everything that went alongside that. And lost his leg overnight. You know,
Came
back into football. He was well looked after at Sheffield Wednesday. They had a testimonial match for him. I think I can't remember the exact size of the crowd, but it was like about 30,000 or something like that. And then the Sheffield Star newspaper, which in a previous life as a journalist I used to work for, I was a trainee journalist there. They had like a public subscription for him that raised in 1953, I think it was about £20,000, which now would be an absolute fortune, you know. So he was well looked after, but then very controversially, he fell out with people at Sheffield Wednesday over contracts and work conditions, things like that. And what was like absolutely unprecedented at the time, he crossed the city to Sheffield United and started working for them as like their commercial manager and a youth team coach and things, you know. And he was kind of not forgiven for quite a few years for that. But then eventually he really did become Sheffield's Mr. Football, you know, for both sides, you know.
Yeah. But I mean, as a writer, there's a screenplay right there, isn't there? He's alive, the kind of beginnings and then the kind of false dawn and the reinvention. It's a great story. But now let's move on now, because you're writing a third book in the trilogy, aren't you? Which really, for me, it sounds so alluring, because it's based on the year of 1974. Would you like to give us a little insight into what kind of things we can expect from that?
Yeah. Well, I'm sort of how far am I into? I'm probably about 3/4 of the way through writing that at the moment. It's funnily enough, actually, Phil, it's what makes doing interviews like this at the moment quite tricky sometimes, because my head's in 1974 at the moment. With all the research and things like that and the detail, and then I'm suddenly thinking 1953. Oh, right, yeah. Gotta give it that. I mean, funnily enough, I was doing a podcast the other day with a guy, a really good interviewer, and he started talking about the 1923 book a lot, and I was like, oh my god, that's over a year ago since I wrote that. What was that chapter? And it was like, I mean, I'll be honest with you. He talked about two particular players that there are stories about in the 1923 book, Tommy Boyle and Tommy Ball. Okay. Now there's a whole chapter in the 1923 book about Tommy Ball, who was actually the first player to be murdered.
Yeah, I read that.
Yeah. And then the other guy, Tommy Boyle, was a Burnley player. And there's a whole separate story about him and coming back into football after the war and things like that. But when this guy asked me, talk about the Tommy Ball and the Tommy Boyle story, for the life of me, I couldn't remember what the story was about Tommy Boyle, because it had been like nearly 2 years since I'd written that book, you know. And I bluffed it. I said that. Told me about the Tommy Boyle, and I said, and let's not give too much away about the Tommy Boyle one. And Johnny Bricks, I apologise to you.
I think it's right though. You're so invested in the research, it just becomes your life while you're writing the book, and then it all goes. Yeah. Sometimes
but going back to your original question though, Phil, the 74 one. I mean, in a way, each of them has come as gift wrapped in a way, because I thought we're 74, 50 years ago next year. So let's just have a look at that year, you know, like economically, politically, what was going on. And from that point of view, it was like the year of the 3-day week, 2 general elections, economic meltdown. The country was in an absolute mess, you know, economically. But also, Alf Ramsey got sacked. Revy took over. Leeds won the league championship as Dirty Leeds and all things that went with that. Brian Clough had his 44 days at Leeds United. We had tragically the first murder inside a football ground that year. Just so many stories once I started digging deeper into the research. And there's patterns. I'm sure you found this when you've been writing, that as soon as you start doing research, you think you know what you're trying to discover. And then you suddenly find yourself going down all sorts of different rabbit holes. Definitely. And discovering stuff that you thought, what? Well, how didn't I know that? You know,
that's even better stories. You can find even better stories than you thought you were looking for.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. You know, where there might just be, you're doing some research on something that you thought that you knew a fair amount about, and then there's just maybe a chance reference in some research that you're doing. Hang on a minute, what's that? And then you kind of research sideways and find sometimes an even more powerful story, you know, and also more powerful because it's not well known, you know.
That's right, man.
I love that.
That's the great thing about writing, the great thing about telling stories, isn't it? You're excited when you've found something like that. You're excited for people to hear it, and it's always marvelous when they come back to you and say, "What a story! That was terrific."
Yeah.
Oh, Marvin, it's been great talk. So remind us of the books in your back catalogue.
Oh, right. So there's More Than Just a Game, Football v Apartheid, which I wrote with Chuck Core. That was for, oh gosh, I can't remember which one. It's either Macmillan.
I think it's Harper Collins.
Yeah. And then I wrote the Hope Powell story, Hope, for Bloomsbury Press. And then for Pitch thus far, I've written Hope You Die of Cancer, which is the book that's about non-league football seen through the eyes of one specific unnamed non-league footballer who remains anonymous for obvious reasons when you read the book, because it's there are some very telling things that he kind of shared with me in that. And then there's the 1923 book, the 1953 book, which is just out now. Is the reason for us talking, of course. And then coming out hopefully next year is the 1974 book. So yeah,
fabulous book. And where are they? They're all still in print and available, aren't they?
Yeah.
And you can get them at all the obvious sites, Amazon, and if you look online, they're quite present there, aren't they?
In fact, today I was seeing a writer friend of mine, Bernadette, who lives over in Leeds, and she'd come over for lunch because she'd got a meeting over in Hull, which is about 20 miles away from me. And she said, "Oh, I've reserved your 1953 book from Waterstones." So I said, "Oh, right, okay." So we went up to Waterstones, and she said, "Oh, I reserved this book. I'll pay for it and everything." And so they gave it to her, and she said, "He wrote that." And the guy said, "Oh, why haven't we had him in for a signing or something?" And I said, "I don't know."
Wow.
I don't know.
Do it? Yeah,
we could do that. Yeah.
So
that was funny.
That's brilliant, mate. Does it still give you the same thrill when you walk into Waterstones, or you go and you see your book on the shelf? Because I imagine that must be such a buzz for an author to do that.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I think I remember seeing my first credits on TV at the end of like programs, things, and that was like, I felt really great about that. I'm very proud about that, because it showed me how far I'd come, from all the hard work that I'd put in before then. But I think that to have my name on a book was always the thing with me. It's like, I've always loved books, always read, always very widely, and did English at university and things like that. And just the idea of going into a shop and seeing your name on a book, that's always been a real buzz. Yeah, I love that.
The thought of also somebody in a different country having your book on their shelf that they've actually read.
Do you know the More Than Just a Game football apartheid book? I mean, that did really well critically all around the world, and it came out in Korean, Japanese, Italian, Dutch, French, loads of different languages. And it was wonderful because they sent me every foreign copy that came out, and they're all there on my bookshelf. I don't understand lots of what's on the spine, never mind what's inside.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really funny because my son Jacob studied Japanese, and he was reading pages for me from the Japanese version, and it was quite different, from my original and Chuck's original kind of writing in English, which I thought was dead interesting. Just on the other future projects things, one that I haven't found the publisher for yet, because I think it's quite a hard one to do, is a book that I've been trying to write for ages, and it's about a French footballer called Villeplan. Do you know about Villeplan?
I'm not
right.
well informed to be.
Okay, right. So he was in the first World Cup in 1930. He was France's captain. Right. He was the first Arab Frenchman ever to play for France. Okay, so that's 1930. 15 years later, he's been shot in a French prison as a Nazi lieutenant, Gestapo lieutenant.
Wow.
And along the way, he's a bank robber, a jewel thief. He sprung from prison in 1940 to become a member of a French Nazi brigade that was created at that time, and then was very involved in a number of massacres in the south of France. And this is the guy who was France's World Cup captain and revered around the country and around North Africa, and there's been so little written about him, and I know why, because if you go on the France International Football website, all you'll get is his name and how many caps he got. Nothing about his background,
It's like a national shame that they've tried to cover. That sounds amazing. That sounds like an amazing
Alexander Villeplan, it was called. And I've managed to after ages and ages, I've managed to locate some research which is basically a testament from his trial in 1945, which is all it's a microfiche or something, and obviously in French. So I know where it is, and now I've got to get hold of there's a friend of mine who's an English teacher in France who's going to hopefully work with the microfiche at this library that's just outside France to get me all the information from the trial, and that will really help me with getting further with the book. But it's a difficult sell, because it's who wants to read this?
I think football fans will love it, because football's football, isn't it? If there's a great story to be told and it's about football people will get it, and they'll enjoy that story. I'd read a book like that every day of the week, mate. It sounds fantastic.
I'll swap you for your Albania book.
Well, we'll do that. We'll do that, definitely. That'll be fantastic. Marvin, it's been an absolute joy talking to you. Honestly,
you too.
The books are fantastic, and thank you for coming on the show. And we'll resume at some point in the future and talk about the future project.
Yeah, I look forward to that. Yeah, been really good talking to you, Phil.
Oh, thank you, mate. You too.
And what I didn't ask you, are you City or Villa?
I'm City, but I'm slightly I'm lapsed a little bit. I go and watch Solihull Moors quite a lot.
Oh, right, good side.
But
Good
yeah,
side.
but now we've got a new regime behind the club that I didn't like the old ownership. So
Yeah,
I might take a trip down there again sometime in the near future.
yeah, Mr. Rooney as well.
Of,
Woo.
of course,
Yeah.
not sure what to think of that either, Marvin. But
Well, time
we'll
will
see how it
tell.
we'll see how it goes, as it always does. Yeah,
Yeah,
football always kind of unfurls new stories, and that's why
it
we're
does,
here,
doesn't it?
isn't it, mate?
It is great talking to you, Phil.
You too, buddy. So join
Yeah,
us next time on Football Geeks for more great stories and wonderful guests.
look
Bye
forward
for
to
now,
that.
guys.
Cheers, Phil. See ya.
Bye.